We thank you for taking the time out of your busy lives and schedules to join us here tonight. Sault Ste. Marie is home to many talented and knowledgeable women of vision. She Lead's purpose is to bring more recognition to need for greater diversity in the world, and that women succeeding in the world is not just good for women, but all mankind. Women succeeding in the world is for everyone. We celebrate the leadership and diversity. We have an incredible keynote speaker and 4 amazing local women that are empowering women who lead within our community as entrepreneurs, team players, C-suite executives, social activists, young professionals, cultural champions, spouses, siblings, children, and mothers. We thank them for agreeing to share their experience and stories with all of us here today. Tonight, we hear from women in leadership roles as they share their insights on how leadership has redefined in the last year. We know that the pandemic has dramatically impacted women, women of our Indigenous peoples, and women of visible minorities more significantly than men, and that many women have left the workforce to tend to their other life priorities. While many have left, the majority have had to redefine their roles in the workplace, at home, and in their relationships. Women in leadership roles have had to redefine as well who they are and how they can lead a diverse workforce while managing the many other constraints demanded of them in today's new normal. We look forward to hearing from them on leading in this new world's paradigm, which includes key aspects of mental health, self-care, and how these have impacted their roles in the context of leadership. We would like to take a moment and acknowledge the following guests in attendance this evening. As Rory mentioned in the beginning of our call, we have some chamber board members. I'd like to welcome Michael Stone, who is immediate past president, Derek Jackson, who is our treasurer, as well as our Strive Young Professionals chair, Salvatore Marchese from Downtown Association, and Sheila Purvis. I would also like to acknowledge some of our previous Athena recipients: Catherine McRae, Marnie Stone, Donna Kinnunen, Karen Bird, and Sherry Burlinghoff. I would also like to thank those men who are in attendance, as any change in society, allyship is critical an element of success and progress. So thank you very much. We are going to take a moment now to recognize the traditional lands on which we live and are holding this virtual event. In the spring of 2021, the Chamber held its Outstanding Business Awards in celebration of the business, community, and stakeholders. At that time, our community was reeling from the discovery of the unmarked graves across Canada and Turtle Island. This should never be forgotten, as we ask that you listen attentively to the acknowledgement that was brought to our awards ceremony by Ozma Vesna on behalf of our community. It remains timely, despite the reference to summer, a very poignant message that needs to be remembered and lived by each and every day from every one of us. I'd like to turn it over to Ozma now.
As well as the Métis Nation. As we enter the summer months, let us take time to reflect on what it means to be part of these lands and how we can each individually, collectively contribute to take care, respect, and honor the land, the fresh water, the clean air, and all of creation that interacts with us, provides for us, and how the Indigenous knowledge, the teachings about looking after this land and all the relations that coexist together in this place, in this space, can guide us in a good way toward a good life. Manoba Motswin. This past year, we've been living through the pandemic. We've been challenged to think seriously about world health, including mental health and wellness. the impacts globally of climate change. We've been experiencing what is increasingly a call across the world for social justice and a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive society. And most recently, we have paused for this moment in time as we reflect on the statements and stories out of Kamloops, where the remains of 215 children's bodies were recently uncovered. I ask that we take some time as leaders, community members, business owners, and organizations to reflect on what we can do. The word empathy has been sitting with me over the last several weeks. It is very different than the word sympathy. To be empathetic is different than to be sympathetic. To be empathetic means taking things much further, from sympathy to the ability to emotionally understand what other people feel and to see things from their point of view and to imagine yourself in their place. In essence, the ability to put yourself in someone else's position, feeling what they might be feeling. Empathy can be a mass phenomenon that brings about fundamental and social change. As we celebrate all of the achievements of our business community this evening, I ask that we hold place in our hearts for those who are suffering, for those who are struggling, and for those who are continuing to face challenge, and that we open up our hearts to real action and change. Action that embraces the teachings of empathy and the ability to invoke action that leads to good change for one and for many. Enjoy the celebration this evening. Miigwech for listening. Miigwech for all you do in this beautiful place of Balating, Sault Ste. Marie. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was a wonderful acknowledgement. And we thought it very timely to show that this evening. Now I have the honor of introducing Ozma. Empathy, strength, compassion, commitment. That is not only the message of reflection of our lost children, brothers, and sisters. It also resonates when we recognize each year the recipient of our Athena Leadership Award winner. In March each year, we celebrate at our Women in Business Breakfast, both International Women's Day and the Athena Leadership Award. The Athena Award was inspired by the goddess of Greek mythology, known for her strength, courage, wisdom, and enlightenment. The award is unique both in scope, local, national, and international, and is presented to a woman or a man who is honored for professional excellence, community service, and for actively assisting women in their attainment of professional excellence and leadership skills. This year's award recipient, Ozma Vesna, is a role model in our community, resulting from her professional excellence, her ability to network and engage people, and her achievements, not only within her professional industry, but also externally to her professional life. Ozma is a highly motivated person with a deep sense of rallying community spirit, building on success and achievement, and she is an individual whose volunteer contributions outside of work and family is a testament to improving the quality of life for Sault Ste. Marie. She is someone whose peers have witnessed firsthand her ability to guide and mentor, but also champion causes that advance not only the principles of She Leads, but also those fundamentals that make the Athena Leadership Award the globally recognized honor that it is. I would like you all to welcome to our virtual event, our current Athena Award recipient, Ozma Vesna.
Thank you so much, Trish. Good evening, everyone. Amin, bienvenue, and welcome. It's so good to be here with you all this evening, and it's so nice to be together for this year's She Leads. I want to first thank the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce for their continued support of this event. It's an event that I think brings us together for inspiration, for networking and friendship building, for smiling and laughing, and most importantly, for support. The journey of leadership is not an easy journey, particularly for women and members of underrepresented groups. So these gatherings are important because they provide us with opportunities to learn from and with each other. Tonight, we're going to learn from some incredible women who are leading through the pandemic, and we will hear from them about how they've redefined their leadership during this time. Trish spoke a little bit about the importance of paying respect and of building our understanding of what was happening in Kamloops and what is happening across the country today as we learn more about the children who did not make it home from the residential school system. When I first started at the university, most people know I was coming into an organization that was struggling a little bit and needed some help. Never in a million years did I think I would be going through a world pandemic for 2 years. And in that second year, never did I think that the property that we were situated on would have to be searched for unmarked graves. The leadership is challenging, and we never really know what's around the corner. The Leadership Redefined theme could not be more appropriate. And I'm so looking forward to hearing Katie Dudshak speak this evening as our keynote. Thank you, Katie, for taking time to be with us this evening. And of course, Isla, Monique, Mary, and Tiffany. You've all had different leadership roles and paths, and what a wonderful and diverse lineup that's come to speak with us this evening. Since the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic, leaders across the globe have had to be quick on their feet in order to respond to the tremendous and far-reaching impacts of the virus. Simultaneously, it's redefined how individuals and institutions drive innovation, creativity, strategy, and often at a very, very fast pace of change, which has been required to ensure our sustainability and success. In my particular circumstance, when the initial lockdown occurred in March 2020, I remember thinking, what am I going to do to protect and support the university through this? We had so many things to consider: health and safety, student success, managing everything that comes with the crisis, including increased costs, dealing with a almost certain decline in revenue. And I had to do a lot of soul searching at that time. There was no book, no leadership book I could turn to in this pandemic. There was no path forged before. And so had to do a lot of soul searching, as many in this room I'm sure did as well. And it was after looking deep within and really thinking about who am I going to be as a leader through this crisis, it took me to the answer. We had to focus on people, right? We had to focus on the people we were serving, and we had to ensure that we supported our people through the pandemic. Now, what that meant and why I share that story is because it also meant doing something different, the dare to be different, the courage to not just go with the grain, to know that what you were doing might be rife with criticism. So how did we do that, and how did I do that as a leader? I depended on other leaders. First thing that I did is I went to our leadership team and I asked them for their support and an unwavering commitment to put people first. This meant that we would have to rework, refocus, and recreate the entire university budget, from one focused on building a $4 to $6 million surplus the first time ever in our organizational history, to one just focusing on balancing the budget. We made a commitment that in that budget there would be no layoffs, and there would be sizable bursaries for our most challenged and vulnerable students. We agreed to delay capital projects that had been planned for many years in an effort to keep our community safe and to enhance what we could do to the teaching and learning environment that was now going online. We knew we could not do this without problem solving and innovation. So we brought students and employees together from across the organization, and we helped ask them and invited them to help us think innovatively. What we also did, and this was a huge learning for me as a leader, is we engaged with elders and spiritual and cultural leaders from the Ojibwe community. And we asked if they would share teachings and cultural practices with us to help us through the pandemic. There were many ceremonies. The one I remember most fondly is a feast plate that was taken down to the river with all of our offerings. And what happened with that feast plate is quite short of remarkable. The feast plate was placed in the river that flows this way, but the feast plate went up the river this way. And then it stayed still in the river for probably 35 seconds. And then it started to make its way down the river, and it actually disappeared. And an eagle came and circled the feast plate while this was happening. And the interpretation of that story and what happened there was that this was not going to be an easy journey. It would be very tough. And at times it would feel like we were floating, that we were swimming upstream against the current. But we were going to be okay. We were going to be okay. And our university has had very little sickness, very little illness, no layoffs. And this year we had our highest enrollment on record. We didn't go at it to break records. We didn't go at it to have surplus. We focused on our people. Having the courage to put people first, putting faith in people to come up with and implement solutions, trusting and encouraging innovative thinking and problem solving across the organization is key. It's not been easy, but it's worked. Are we all exhausted after COVID? Yeah, we're exhausted, every one of us. Has it been fraught with stress and anxiety? Yes. Do we still face challenges? Yes. What's my biggest worry right now? Burnout, mental health issues, exhaustion. But I'm grateful. I am so grateful to live here in Canada, in Sault Ste. Marie, Bouting. I'm grateful to have vaccination access. I'm grateful to have a roof over my head, to have a job at Algoma University, to have evenings like we have tonight. And so while we face challenge, I think it can bring us closer together. It makes us stronger. It makes us wiser. And I think for a lot of us, it puts life in perspective. So today, I look forward to learning from all of you as you share your stories and your insights. It's the fellow leaders who've navigated the evolving pandemic and redefined challenges into opportunities. We learn from each other and with each other. And I want to personally thank those in this room who've had tea with me, wine, lunch, dinner. I remember being out on a deck with a few of you this summer, just kind of drinking that beer and thinking, what the hell have we got ourselves into? But we're there for each other, and we need to be there for each other, and we need to continue to lift each other up. Yeah, we're in uncertain times, but together we can move mountains. And so let's stay together, let's keep together, let's enjoy it together, and let's keep moving together. Thank you so much. Chimi Glitch, merci beaucoup. And off to Katie.
Thank you, Asma. That was amazing. And thank you for your contribution to our community and all of your leadership. We are so blessed to have you. And now I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our keynote speaker this evening, Katie Duchek. Katie is an Executive Vice President, Regional Banking with RBC. She leads 20,000 advisors across the country. She is also a woman with gender transition experience. Today, Katie will share insights from her personal and professional journeys and speak to the power of purpose-driven and inclusive leadership in creating a more inclusive, equitable, and sustainable world for all of us. Before we begin, Katie, I would just like to offer my thanks to you. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us and share your leadership with all of us. As an RBC employee and having had the opportunity to hear you share your guidance over the last few years, I know all of our panelists and guests tonight will certainly take something away and be guided by you. We are so honored to have you here. Thank you so very much. I am going to turn it over to Karen to ask our first question.
I also wanted to take a couple of
Thank you
minutes.
for the invite, by the way.
Oh, you're very welcome. I also wanted to take a couple of minutes to thank you as well. Katie, our relationship goes back quite a number of years, and for the other people on the I'll say the room, it's a Zoom room, I guess, everyone else in the room. Many years ago, in some of my work with RBC around back in the day was called Aboriginal people and Royal Eagles. Katie was one of a few leaders that always made an effort to come out, to support, to share, to champion. And that hasn't changed over all of the years that you've done. You've just expanded who you champion now and what you do and who you support. And so also as an RBC employee, I'm so very proud to have you with us. And the first question that I'm going to ask, as you know, and as probably everybody else in here knows, I kind of get to the point. I don't mince any words. So we're going to start right off with a question that's just going to bring everything to the forefront. So you know, when Trish did her introduction, she had talked about gender affirmation, and that's something that happened in 2019. And I still remember the day as an RBC employee sitting at my desk, and this email came with you on it, and it had a little video attached. And you sat and spoke about your journey, where had it come from, where you were at, and where you were going. And I thought, is this real? Am I watching this at work? It was amazing. I literally cried through that. It just, I could not, I can't even put into words how I felt. Please share with us before you did that, how that led up. You came out in that message to everyone. Please tell us how that happened.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. And thank you to all, and you too, Trish. It's an honor to work with both of you at RBC. And I've known you longest, Karen, but it is a true honor to be here and to work with both of you. And it's wonderful to be back in Northern Ontario or the Sioux. Just to give me a little local context, I twice in my career I've overseen Northern Ontario in leadership roles. And early in my career, I lived in Thunder Bay, and I lived in Timmins, and I would frequent Sault Ste. Marie. So it feels like a bit of a homecoming to be coming back to spend time with you in the Sioux. So thank you for the invite. So what was it like before June 17th, 2019? It was a quiet storm, and then it became a horrific storm. So firstly, I want to talk about gender affirmation versus the term Trish used of gender transition. and the term that's used publicly, transgender. I am not a fan of the label. I'm not a fan of labels in general. And as women, you would relate to this. Well, she's just a girl, or she's just a woman, and can she really do those tough jobs in business or in the community or what have you? So labeling people tends to cause us to stereotype people. Is my first issue with labels. And the other is not only does it stereotype, but it doesn't pay tribute to the whole human being. And I'll come back to the whole human being and who I am in a minute. But I really think we're at a point in society where we need to take time to understand the whole human being, not just the tip of the iceberg, both to create a kinder, more empathetic world, but also to learn from other human beings' experiences and where their gifts and where their talent and where their uniqueness comes from. I also don't like the label transgender because I didn't transition my gender. I affirmed my gender. If you read scientific research, they suggest that gender is in your brain, and obviously in your heart, but you're born with it in your brain. And they've also proven that the physical body develops at a different trimester than the brain does, which can allow you to have a feminized brain and a masculinized body once you go through puberty. So the reality is the person I am today and my expression, my behavior, everything about me, I can relate back to my childhood at as long as I can remember, at 4 and 5 years old. So I am literally just expressing all of myself the way I felt back as a child. I didn't have words for it. I didn't understand it. But the bottom line is my process in 2000, well, it wasn't just 2019, over a few years, was a process of affirming my gender, not transitioning it. And then back to what's called in diversity work or inclusion work, intersectionality. And Karen's question about what was it like? Like many people, I had quite a complex story to figure out as a child. My parents were newcomers to Canada from Germany. My mother was a child refugee in the Second World War. My father was a Russian POW. They both lost parents during the war. They obviously developed extreme trauma and PTSD through the war. That's what you would call it today. They didn't call it that back then. They said, suck it up and move on. That's how we handled pain back then. But they brought that to Canada. And then they struggled as farmers down near London, Ontario. So I'm a farm girl at the core. So I grew up in a home that had a lot of intergenerational trauma passed on, much like happens in the Indigenous community through all the atrocities that we know. So I grew up with verbal abuse. I grew up with a lot of screaming and yelling. And we were pretty poor. I also, as a child, struggled in school, especially in public school, a little bit in high school. And I'm sure if you diagnosed me today, you would say I'm dyslexic. I'm good at cognitive reasoning. I'm good at conceptual thinking and big picture thinking. I'm, strong on the humanities side, but don't ask me to tell you the difference between verbs and adjectives, and don't ask me to tell you the times table, because as soon as I get to odd numbers, I get screwed up. So my rote memory is bad. So I struggled in school because school's not set up for that. I certainly wasn't set up for that back then. So between feeling judged by teachers and bullied for my last name and German roots and my big nose, and the verbal abuse at home, I developed a lot of insecurity. And in addition to that insecurity, I had these gender feelings. I wanted to skip with the girls, not play soccer with the boys. I would spend hours in my mother's jewelry box and trying on my mother's clothes. I felt feminine. And I would secretly express that femininity. I remember like 10 or 12 years old, putting on my sister's bra and underwear and stuffing it full of toilet paper and going to put my clothes on and going to play in the sandbox. Like, the reality is, all those emotions and all those feelings were going through my mind as a child and as a teenager. So then you say, well, why did it take you to roughly age 50 for this to come to a head? Well, because of all of that, at the core of my being, if you said, what's your soul? My soul is kind, affectionate, highly sensitive, and curious. But what developed through those life experiences early was this fierce determination, this kind determination. I would be sweet and kind, but I would not let anybody stand in my way of my life, because I was going to prove the teachers wrong. I was going to prove my parents that I could build a better life. And by the time I hit teenage life, I was going to build a perfect family, find a perfect partner, and I was going to build a perfect country home. And I was not going to let a single soul stand in the way of my career and my achievement. So if you've ever known anybody that's affirmed their gender or in the transgender community, it is not abnormal for you to become hyper at hiding these things within you through self-shame, through guilt, through self-hate, and by just being fiercely, fiercely busy. I don't really relate to Caitlyn Jenner, the person, but I relate to her story. She poured herself into sports early in her life, and that consumed her. And then once she achieved the top in sports, she was still haunted by her gender issues. So that's kind of the first chapter of my story. The reality, though, and this is an important lesson for women especially, but men too, there's the person that is in your soul and your core identity that you're born with. Some people are born playful and expressive and creative, and some people are born more cerebral and academic. Like, it's okay. Some people are extroverted, some people are introverted. But there's the core identity or soul that you're born with, and then there's the person you create for the world through conditioning, through your parents, through school, through friends, through society. In my case, the person I created, this highly achievement motivated person, this person that tried to fit in the masculine world, left behind that creative, expressive, feminine identity as much as I could. But when you create such distance between your soul and the person you create for the world, eventually something breaks. Eventually something breaks. It's not uncommon for a man or a woman to come out as gay at 70 years old. And having had children and having been married, it's not uncommon. They just hide from it. They suppress it. They use shame and hate to push it to the background until they can no longer do it. And they either reconcile it on their deathbed or something snaps and they have to face it midlife. And that's what happened for me is as I got older, early to mid 40s, these gender feelings were driving me more and more crazy. And as my children got older, I have 4 children between 18 and 23. As they got older and needed me less, as I got more accomplished in my career and I didn't have to think as hard and work as hard, and as my marriage matured, these gender feelings just began to overflow. I could no longer suppress them. But I still didn't have language for it. And so it was getting worse in chapter 2, but I didn't have language for it. And but I was seeing signals in the community. I saw Caitlyn Jenner come out and I go, is she a freak? Like, what the heck is that? I dropped my daughter off at university, and on the wall of the university dorm was a person assigned male at birth, but wearing a silk blouse and pearls, looking cute. And I said, oh my God, I said it to myself, not to my daughter who I was dropping off at school. I said, oh my God, could I become the person I've always been in the world of today, just by way of that poster. That was my reaction. I had no words for it. I just identified with it. Then National Geographic, 6 months later, comes out with a book on gender. And I still didn't understand it, but I was drawn to it. And I go, oh my God, maybe here's the answer. I literally bought the National Geographic online. I gave it to my spouse. And I said, you never know, one of our kids could be gay or transgender or something. You should read this. Because I didn't know the answer, but I knew there was something and it was closing in on me. My son comes out as bisexual a couple months later. My mother died, who was my hero. And I didn't have to hide myself from her anymore. And then on August 25th, 2017, I booked lunch with an expert on LGBT and a friend of mine. And I said, what the heck is transgender? And who the heck is this Caitlyn Jenner? Is she just a freak? Is she just going to, create another reality TV show and convert back to Bruce in 5 years? And he goes, no, she was haunted by her gender feelings her entire life to the point that she could no longer cope and she had to face it. And he was explaining to me a little bit about Caitlyn's story, and I go, wow. And then I go, yeah, but how can she be Caitlyn and still be attracted to girls? And he looks at me and he goes, her gender is female. It's always been female. And she's attracted to girls. That makes her a lesbian. And I go, oh my God, you could have pushed me over with a feather in that moment. And finally, I had a framework and something that I could relate to. And within hours, I was on the internet. And within more hours, I became a zombie because I finally had the answer I was looking for. And immediately, I felt like I had betrayed my children. I felt I had betrayed my spouse. And within a few weekends of stressful mental health issues already, I was convinced I would be homeless. I was convinced that I would ruin the life of my family. So that is kind of the beginning of chapter 3, is the realization of my true gender. After having semi-successfully suppressed it and hidden from it in many ways. It was always there. I could tell you all kinds of things that haunted me daily, but I was able to move past them within seconds and kind of get on with my busy life. And so what happened after that was I first told my spouse within a week and a half because I felt like I had betrayed her. I went through a number of gender therapists, several of which were quite horrific. Thank goodness the Canadian, much like abolishing residential schools, Canada has another momentous event this past week where Canada criminalized conversion therapy. I can assure you that thousands and thousands and thousands of Canadians have taken their lives because of abuse or because of conversion therapy for being gay. The mental health is not being transgender or being gay. That's just human. I have never been happier. I love myself. I've never been more at peace with myself. But in that, through the gender therapists, the horrific ones, and through this period of severe gender dysphoria is this disconnect you feel, this anxiety you feel when you are not living in the right body. You don't feel like you can express your true self. You feel like a caged wild animal. At the worst of times and the best of times, you feel immense homesickness because you can't go home and sleep in your bed as the person that you really are. And so that year and a half was hard. And I developed, through my fears and through some rejection and judgment that I experienced, the worst of mental health. And I came very close to taking my life in September, October of 2018. And thank goodness to having a network of friends that I trust in the mental health space. My dear friend Leanne Wiebe said, Katie, your plan is flawed. Your children won't think it was an accident. Your children will figure out your truth eventually, and you will create multi-generational trauma for your children. And so I had to face my truth. So I literally wrote a letter of intention to myself. This isn't made up, this is the truth. And in my letter of intention, I said to myself that I am Canadian. I work for a great company. I have a lot of leadership experience and a network. I should be able to do this better than any human being has ever done it before. And that was my letter of intention to myself. And I set a goal that I would live for another 50 years for my children. Whether they want me around for another 50 years is another question. And whether they want me around every day now is a question that I've since had to face after setting that goal. I want to be around for 50 years for my kids. I'm just not sure they want me around that much. But that was the goal that I set. And then after that, chapter 4 started. I took ownership of my truth. In December, my partner and I, my ex-partner, my marriage did not make it. That's another atrocity. You think you're loved for your soul until you reveal your true gender and they tell you they're not gay, which I totally respect in her. But it was another hardship that I had to go through of losing the person you love the most. When you were really running away from the person you were assigned at birth, not running away from your partner. So that was hard. But we came out to my children. I started hormone therapy in January. I told our CEO, Dave Mackay, in February. And at that point, I had never seen this person in the mirror before in my life. And I went to New York. I got a fashion expert and makeup expert that works with people like me to help me out. And I got to see myself in the mirror for the first time. I knew that woman 2 years earlier. I resisted going to New York because I knew that if I saw the person I hoped I was, you would never get me back. And that's exactly what happened. So in April, my closest friends got to meet Katie. In May, the board of directors of RBC got to see the video that Karen talked about and a photo of me. Senior management got to see the video and a photo of me. And then on June 17th, 2019, 80,000 employees got to see the video that Karen referenced. And the opposite happened. And I'm sure we'll talk about that, Karen. But that is the long version of my intersectionalities, of how and why I was able to suppress it for the most part, why it came to a head, how excruciatingly challenging it was. It was hard my whole life. I now, in hindsight, realize I carried anxiety. I was far more stressed. I was the kind of parent that kicked the dog because the dog was vulnerable. And, I carried anxiety that today I no longer carry. I am just a kind, peaceful person that rarely gets worked up. I get sad and I get hurt all the time, but I don't get angry anymore. I don't have that kind of anxiety anymore. So I carried a lot of anxiety and self-shame and self-hate. And then I dealt with the worst of mental health during a couple of year period, as I had to face my fears and make the choice to live, not to take my life. And as we'll talk about, what I experienced was the complete opposite of what I expected.
Thank you. I've not heard that story in its entirety. And while you were going through your answer, I made a couple of notes. And it's amazing because you talk about it's just human. It's not this, it's not that, it's just human. And my life experience is very different than yours, but there are so many things in there that are exactly the same, regardless of whether you're feminine, masculine, white, black, indigenous. It's human that the life is human that you go through. And then those things kind of diffract to other things in there. You talked about the anxieties. So thank you for all of that. I'm sure there was lots that everyone that's listening could identify with. And so when we were preparing for today, we had 2 or 3 other questions on the docket here. And Trish and I were going to kind of go back and forth. And she just gave me a little note there, say, just go ahead, just keep going. So I'm going to ask you the next question. And I know I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but absolutely want to keep listening to you for a very long time. You talked about the phases of your life as chapters, and it led up to, you know, when you were talking about at RBC that day, that I'm sure that was an extremely pivotal day, career and personally. So if you could share some of the unexpected outcomes of that and the impact that had on your journey.
Yeah, for sure. As I suggested earlier, and I will be more efficient, the front question's always the long one. What I experienced that was unexpected was an extraordinary level of love and kindness and support from thousands, from really everybody. I still lead, I'm in the same job as I was. I've been in this job 7 years. I offered to give up my job recently, and they said, no way, we want you in this job. You are by far the best person for this job, technically and as a leader. Whether that's true or not, I'll go with it for now. But the point is, I received extraordinary level of support from the company and the CEO and my boss, but I received even more extraordinary support from employees, family, friends, and the community. I literally went into my office for the first time in 2 years, and I've got these 2 4-inch binders that my assistant printed off of the emails I received in the first week from employees. And you can break the sentiment into 3 parts. Oh my God, you're brave and courage. And at that point, I didn't even know what brave and courage meant. That I had to look up the definition, because I thought, like, they're such beautiful words. Oh, you're brave and you're courage. And there was nothing about my life that felt beautiful. I was fearful of the worst. And candidly, I was just acting to save my life and act on my commitment to live. Then second theme was, you're going to save lives. Oh my God, Katie, you're going to save lives. And I go, I'm doing this for selfish reasons. I'm doing it to save my own life, not other people's lives. But they go, because of your role and your seniority and your visibility, you're going to save lives. You're going to create hope for people. I go, and I would cry every time I'd read one of those emails, because I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm doing this for so selfish reasons. I never for a second thought that this was about the community and, you know, Canadians and beyond. And then the third thing that humbled me the most, and it goes to where you were going, Karen, is people started to tell me their own stories. And they're not just LGBT stories. There's a female colleague that walks in my office and says, Katie, I have a wonderful life. I have an amazing husband. But there is not a day that goes by that I don't remember the pain of being physically abused by my first husband. And she goes, and I carry this hurt. And she goes, I feel more normal and more human today than I did yesterday because you shared your vulnerability. I know I'm not alone. A gentleman who grew up in India wrote me an email and says, Katie, I have never told anybody this story, but my friend growing up in teenage life told me that he was attracted to boys. We didn't have words for that in India. It freaked me out, so I ostracized myself from my friend in India because I didn't know what to do with it. And he goes, and 5 years later, my friend was put into an arranged marriage, and 12 months later, my friend took his life. And my colleague from British Columbia said, I've never told anybody this before, and I have carried the guilt for so many years with me that I could have been there for my friend. And hopefully, Katie, with people like you being open and out and teaching us that we're all human, we all just have different, unique dimensions to us, that maybe the world will become more aware and more open, and my friend would still be here. And I get shivers thinking about that story. So I heard lots of LGBT stories. I heard lots of women's stories. Karen knows me well. Trish knows me. I'm a pretty empathic leader. I get to know the whole human being that works with me. I know white men that lost siblings and were there to watch their siblings die in childhood, that are hiding that hurt and pain. I know a bit of Karen's story and the abuse that Karen would have dealt with. We have a dear colleague in the Indigenous community who has given up to foster homes because her mother is a residential school survivor and her mother couldn't care for her. And she went through foster home after foster home and eventually became homeless and eventually put herself through high school on craft dinner, living on her own as a young Métis woman. And today she is a regional vice president with RBC, was in Saskatoon and is now in Victoria. And if you ever met Annette, much like Karen can be direct, but Karen is one of the kindest people I know. And the irony of the men that lost siblings, my colleague whose mother committed suicide when he was 24, whether it's Annette, the Indigenous woman, whether it's Justin, the gay man, or whether it's these other people that told me their stories, the common thread is they're clearly determined, but they are among the kindest people I have ever met. And what I saw and what I learned, and I should have known it, but I was always an empathic leader, but I didn't have such a broad view on the hurt that so many human beings are carrying around with them under the surface. And how it causes so many people to hold back and feel, especially women. Women can relate to this in a heartbeat, to feel inferior, to feel less than, and therefore you don't lean in and you don't share all of your gifts and all of your ideas and all of your passions because you're holding back out of imposter syndrome or out of hurt or out of fear of rejection. And I saw that 12 months before Black Lives Matter, 24 months before residential schools, and 12 months before COVID-19. So, I like to think I've been a relatively kind and empathetic leader, but I certainly came into COVID and into the social issues of the last 2 years far, far more aware of the pain and the hurt that people carry around, and extraordinarily inspired by people who chose to manifest their hurt and the atrocities in kindness and love, not hate. Because they have every reason to hate, but they chose kindness because they'd never want another human being to experience what they experienced. And they have empathy for other people. So it's transformed, it's taken me to a whole other level as a human being, as an advocate for human rights, as an advocate for inclusion, as an empathic leader. I no longer, so those are all the surprises that I got and all the gifts I got as a human being. I am also gay, so I am attracted more so to women. And the only reason I tell you that is my life's not perfect. I have many days where I'm lonely because I miss a companion and a life mate. There's many days that I take on the hurt, and I'm sure many of you do take on the hurt of others because you're empathic, and I'm more empathic now than ever, so I can get emotionally exhausted very easily. But I wouldn't give up any of the gifts and any of the lessons. The price of being lonely and the price of having empathy is this ability to be a kinder person and a more at peace person. So those are the gifts, Karen, that I got. And I kind of answered your third question, Karen, around, what does it mean for leadership? I am a massive advocate, and I spend a lot of time with my senior leadership now, whether we're talking about remote work, hybrid work, still about COVID, whether it's about, employees that are caregivers, whether it's employees that have other traumas that they're dealing with. I spent a lot of time coaching and teaching inclusive leadership practices to my senior leadership team and leaders across the country, because I fundamentally believe that we will not solve social and economic divide without empathy and creating a more inclusive world. But I don't think we're going to solve climate change and the environmental crisis without working together in a kinder, more collaborative, more authentic way either. And whether we save this planet or not, I'm going to choose to live with kindness and try to work hard to create hope, because it's just a far better way to live our lives. So that's those are the lessons of my journey. Those are some of the leadership insights that came out of my journey. You know, I feel exceptionally blessed to be alive, and I feel even more blessed to be able to express. You get to see the sentimental and the you know, the reflective part of Katie. There's equally a playful and a quirky and a fun, a fashion-oriented Katie. Like I get to express all of me, and I have one lesson for women. Oh my God, go back in your roots and find your true self. So many women have suppressed so much of your core spirit because of the hardships of parenting and the hardships of holding the home together, and it wears you down. And then on top of that, to fit into the workplace, you feel like you have to masculinize yourself and be more left brain and more serious and cerebral, and maybe that is your authentic self. And if it is, amazing. But if it's not your authentic self, help yourself and go find her, because she deserves to breathe and she deserves to be out there. And there is no darn way I'll tell you my age, at 55 freaking years old, that I am going to be anybody but Katie at work, at the lake, or the camp, or anywhere other than be myself. Because I only have 50 more years to go, and I'm going to make sure they're the best 50 years. So a small bit of advice for you as women: be true to yourself, find that true self.
That was awesome. The part that kind of hit me the most was when you were talking about manifesting the hurt in kindness. And it brought me back to a memory when I was in the wake of all of the stuff with my daughter and going through court, and people in my ex's family were slinging stuff at me that, you know, could have ruined me in my career and in my personal life. And people kept asking me, why aren't you fighting back? Why aren't you doing that back? And as much as it hurt me and as angry as I was about it, I couldn't do it. I couldn't act like that. I said, what are my children going to think if I react that way? I can't. And so when you were talking about that, that's what came to my mind. And I'm so sure there are other women who identify with that moment where they made a choice to sacrifice something that they really maybe wanted to do so that they could take the higher road for people in their family, people around them. And so, yes, you have answered question 3 and some of question 4, but there's a little piece in question 4 that I really, if in our last few moments, if you could really talk about this one, there's an idea that you talk about visible and invisible dimensions of human uniqueness. If you could expand on that, please.
Yeah, that's the Katie definition of diversity. Much like I hate labels, especially the TG label, I'm not a fan of what we've made the word diversity mean. So if you're a white male or white female, middle class, and you say, I'm committed to diversity, what it's interpreted as is I'm committed to you guys over there. You're the different ones. When the reality is, it suggests difference, and difference suggests divisive. So I just don't like what it infers. Diversity is not a bad word. Difference is not a bad word. But it suggests divisiveness rather than inclusiveness. So when I go through my life experience as a newcomer kid, as a kid with a learning disability, as a kid with gender challenges, as a woman, and all the stories I heard about in my journey from other people, and through my career, you know, the white guy whose mother took her life, you know, the 2 gentlemen whose siblings died. You know, what I realize is that the common across all of us is number one, we're human. And there is no human being born dumb. You know, Indigenous people are not intellectually disadvantaged. Black people are not intellectually disadvantaged. Women are not intellectually disadvantaged. It's all bogus. We're all human and we're all born with extraordinary talents. Is the first part. The second is diversity is both, or the dimensions of diversity are both visible and invisible. It may not be visible that I'm gay. It may not be visible that I'm carrying around trauma from a loss of a sibling. It may not be visible that I'm carrying around mental health issues because of the loss of my mother. Or it may be visible that I'm Indigenous. It may be visible that I'm female. It may be visible I'm from India. But in both cases, and Karen, you touched on this a while ago, the other common thread is every one of those people I just referenced carries around hurt and fear of being judged for what their own perceived weakness is. Women are weak. Women aren't as strong. Women are too sensitive. You know, the person from India can't speak English well enough, therefore they're not smart enough. So the men I know, the white men I know with the, hardships, invisible hardships, the women I know, the newcomers to Canada I know, the Indigenous people I know, the Black people I know, they all have a common thread. They carry hurt. They carry fears of being rejected. They carry fears of being judged. They carry fears of being weaker than the identity of the powerful leader that society puts out there. When you really look at it, though, those visible and invisible dimensions are what make that human being unique and special and beautiful. Because empathy is beautiful. The ability to relate to other people is beautiful. The ability to solve problems because of what you've experienced is beautiful. So I simply like the expanded definition of diversity, as we are all, or most of us, made up of visible and invisible dimensions of human uniqueness. We are human. We carry around beautiful gifts within each of us. It is those visible and invisible dimensions that have shaped who we are. And we need to bring those out into the workplace, out into society, so that people no longer feel the hurt, they no longer feel the shame, and they feel included, and a sense of belonging, and a sense of psychological safety, a sense of being heard and respected for the true human being that they are. And so my expanded definition of diversity leads naturally into the definition of inclusion, which is psychological safety, which is being heard, which is being respected. That's the backstory, Karen, of how I think about why I like the definition I've come up with, because it in and of itself is inclusive, and it can help us speak to the pains that so many people carry that ironically have made them strong, have made them creative, have made them the kind, empathic people that they are. They're not weaker, they're beautiful, and they're stronger, and they're more authentic human beings because of those experiences. So that's the backstory, Karen.
It's amazing. Every time we talk, I'm always making notes. I've always got things that I'm writing down. It always makes me think about things in a different way. And so we would like to try and take some questions. And so Trish, are there any questions from the floor? We'll call it the floor, from the audience.
They're probably all exhausted. They're probably all tired out.
Is there any, Trish, are you there? Can you take over the questions? That would be great.
Yeah, I'm just seeing where.
You can ask me anything. As long as you ask it in a kind way, anything goes. The reason I said kind way is I literally had somebody in a public environment run over to me and said, Katie, tell me about your genitals. I will say it in the Sioux because you have a sense of humor. I was mortified. I was mortified. And then when I recoiled, I won't say whether it's he or she, it was a man. They told me, you better be prepared to have difficult conversations. I go, not about that.
No.
I said, when else in your life have you ever asked a male or a female about their genitals? Oh, good point.
Right.
Oh my God. Anyway, any questions, guys? I'm happy to stick around. I'm sorry I went so long.
No, not at all. We so thank you. And I always take something away, and I think as you're talking about being true to yourself and being kind, and that makes me think of me as a mother and how I'd like to display both of those things to my daughter differently going forward, and making sure that she's true to herself and growing up and supporting and being a kind individual. And so thank you, Katie, very, very much.
You speak of your children. I don't think any of us are perfect. I talked earlier about having anxiety and being the parent that would want to kick the dog. As I was going through my journey, I could not be, and my children knew, I could not be present to my children's feelings. And in actual fact, I was so self-absorbed by my fear and anxiety of being rejected by my children, I became hypersensitive to every emotion my children would express. I was driving my youngest daughter, and my youngest daughter was still home. The other 3 kids were away at university, so she got to see more of it. And, you know, she would react negatively to me out of her anxiety, and then I would react negatively to her out of my anxiety, and it was fireworks. It was not pretty. And she told me 2 weeks ago on the drive back to Kingston, she goes, my psychologist, my children have all had therapists now. It's pretty normal these days. We need more therapists in the world. She goes, my psychologist says that, you know, you've demonstrated narcissistic tendencies. And I'm going, the old me would have reacted. There's no friggin' way. And so I literally got home from dropping her off at university and I Googled, what does narcissistic mean? And there's a couple of dimensions that I could relate to during my darkest time. And so I sent my daughter the definition and I said, you know, thanks for telling me how you felt and what your therapist said. And I just said, you know, I couldn't be there for you. I couldn't be there for you the way you needed me to be because I was so afraid of being judged and rejected. And I'm sorry, I couldn't be there for you as your mom. And as the parent that you deserved. And oh my God, Trish, it was a breakthrough moment. She was in tears. She was at university. It happened through text, but she was beside herself that I had enough emotional maturity to come back and apologize for not being able to be present to her. And she just said, thank you for letting me speak up. And thank you and all she said was, thank you for listening to me. So I don't think any of us as women or dads, you know, are ever going to be perfect, but, you know, it goes a long way to be willing to be self-reflect and self-assessed and to, you know, go away and think and come back kind and loving to our kids for sure. Oh,
we have a question, I believe.
Yes, we do.
Awesome.
Asima's got a question.
First of all, thank you so much, Katie. That was just an incredible story that you shared, and I've learned so much from you. And I think my question, first of all, I really want you to come and speak at the university. I think more people need to hear your story. But if you were to give advice to leaders in different businesses and organizations who want to create these inclusive spaces for people, and safe places, and places where people can be who they are, and places that help people who are hurting, because they are in every organization, they are in every community. What would you suggest? Like, if there were 2 or 3 things that leaders should be focusing on in their organizations, what would you say are 2 or 3 things people should really pay attention to?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Asima. I think there's 3 or 4 at a high level, and some of them aren't new to us in public service or business or what have you. Number 1, you do need goals. From a diversity standpoint, we need goals. If you do not have representation of your community or your society at all levels of your organization, you need goals. And you've got to push hard to make sure that you create, when you have a senior management team of 5 people, you're never going to have all of humanity represented in 5 people. But you darn well better have a diverse leadership team with diverse, visible and invisible human experiences and human uniqueness on it. Otherwise, they're not going to have the level of empathy. They're not going to have the level of thought leadership, and the level of human perspective that you need to lead a multicultural, a diverse, and a creative organization going forward. So diversity is not just about representing society. It's also about tapping into human and intellectual power that different styles and different life experiences give you. So you need to have goals is the number 1, and you got to be held accountable. And every board of directors, if you've got a board, should be holding you accountable to progress, meaningful progress, over the shorter term, not the longer term. Secondly, you got to have training. You've got to have anti-racism training. We have a program at the bank called 4 Seasons of Reconciliation that we did with the Indigenous school in Saskatchewan, where we're teaching 150 horrific years of history, the truth of history, to our employees from the Indigenous community. We just launched anti-racism training. So you've got to have diversity training. I will applaud PricewaterhouseCoopers. They just launched inclusion training, and the employees of PricewaterhouseCoopers have to achieve inclusion badges for different courses they take. And again, back to the way I described inclusion is different. And I'm going to come to that in a second in my last couple of points. It is about creating an environment of psychological safety and an environment where people can share their whole self. So, I think inclusion training is the other thing to come. Then you have to create that inclusive leadership culture. That's the 3rd pillar. And I think in the inclusive leadership culture, you need to do what PwC is doing, is teach it. Many people don't demonstrate inclusive leadership, not because they're bad people, because they're afraid. What do I say to Katie? What's a legitimate question to ask Katie? What do I ask a woman? What do I ask a gay person? I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to walk into a rat's nest. So I role model what's called an inclusion dialogue every 6 weeks in front of 1,500 to 3,000 leaders in the division of the bank that I lead. And it's an hour-long call, but the first 15 minutes are dedicated to an inclusion discussion. And I basically ask 3 questions. I ask them to share their story of human uniqueness. So Annette, the Indigenous woman, the Métis woman, she shared her story of her mother's residential school experience and growing up on Kraft Dinner and putting herself through high school as a homeless girl. And then second question I ask is an Annette, or what Karen and I talked about is, how can you be this incredibly strong yet incredibly kind human being you are when you have so much to be hurt about? And then the third question is, what advice would you give leaders? But I simply ask them a role model. What does an inclusion conversation look like in front of thousands of leaders that is done in a safe way and a non-judgmental way? I'm not asking them these three questions to judge them. I am not debating their answers to the three questions. It's not my place to debate the answer to their questions. It's their story, it's their experience, it's their life. All I'm asking them to do is to share a bit about themselves and a bit about how they think and behave and what they would want leaders to do. So it's a one-way conversation, me asking them three questions. And I can tell you, every one I do, people are blown away by them. They're blown away by the stories and the people behind the stories. So I think as leaders, we have to role model what those inclusion conversations are. And then as leaders, we need to start having them so we can build the comfort level in going deeper with the whole person. You know, so many of us were taught to only go skin deep at work, only talk to the tip of the iceberg, the job, and the skills of the job and the tasks of the job. Inclusion discussions force you to expose the whole iceberg and get to know the whole human being. And it's a new skill. So you got to role model and you have to practice it. So I would say to leaders, start one-on-one and just apologize a lot on the front end and say, I'm really sorry if I'm going to say something wrong, but I really want to get to know you more deeply. And if I say something wrong, just say so. But I want to understand, Karen, about your experience as an Indigenous woman. You know, tell me about one of the more challenging experiences of your life. You don't need to ask anything more than that because it's sitting right under the surface. So you can do it one-on-one, or you can do it in small groups, or you can do it in a large group. So I think leaders need to start role modeling what it's like to have those inclusion conversations and how to make a safe space to have those conversations, and not allow judgment and debates about Indigenous history to enter the conversation. That's wrong. And then the fourth pillar is you got to measure and you got to monitor. You got to measure inclusion. Most organizations do employee surveys, but you got to create questions that speak to psychological safety, that speak to feeling heard, speak to feeling respected. And you know, you got to monitor it. You got to create a pulse for inclusivity in the culture. And then you need an employee resource group. You need one or two people that will handle investigations, so that when people speak up, because you need a speak up line and a respectful workplace policy, that if people aren't being dealt with respectfully, and if it isn't inclusive, that they have a place to speak up. And then that place has to become good at doing investigations, not only on employment law, but they also need to be able to do investigations to understand the nuances of where the leader or the colleague might have gone wrong from an inclusion standpoint, and either cross the line so that you can root it out of your culture, or that you can coach to it and go back to the beginning and teach, train it, role model it, etc. So targets, training, role modeling inclusive leadership, and training around inclusive leadership, and then you got to measure and build it into your ER practices would be the four things that I would do.
Thanks very much, Katie.
Anyone else? Any more hands? No more hands?
No more hands. Oh, did I hear someone? No. Okay, well, thank you, Katie, so much. Your insights and leadership and your guidance tonight was amazing. We can't thank you enough. And I know Karen and I can both attest, and I think we have some other RBCers on the line as well, that your commitment to us is amazing. And you really do bring an inclusive workplace to us, and we are so thankful. And
Thank you. Thank you, Trish. This is, I think you would both agree, this is the real Katie that shows up at work every day. So,
yeah.
I would have this conversation with, 10 people or 1,000 people any day of the week. So it's pretty ingrained in my belief system and my personal values now. So, it is an honor to be here and be back in the Soo with all of you.
Thank you so much. And I hope you can stay and join, but we understand your schedule is.
I will. I literally brought wine because I saw an email that said I was supposed to bring wine.
Oh, there's Michelle.
Yeah, Michelle brought wine.
Awesome. Well, I'll be having some after I've done my speaking.
Okay, thanks, guys.
Thank you. So I'm going to transition now, and this is a very special moment for me. In my years with the Chamber, I've never had the opportunity to introduce this lovely lady. So Karen Bird hails from the Batchewana First Nation. Karen is an assistant branch manager and investment advisor with RBC Dominion Securities. She is also the vice president of the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce and is a graduate of Trent University and was previously designated project management professional with over 21 years of varied business and financial industry experience, including personal financial services, commercial, business advisory, house property management, renewable energy, co-management, business plan writing, and startup coaching. Karen was a proud recipient of the 2015 Influential Women of Northern Ontario's Aboriginal Leadership Award, the RBC's Diversity Leadership Award, and is the Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce 2019 Athena Leadership Award recipient. Beyond that, Karen is also my very, very dear friend. Welcome, Karen, and thank you for everything you do for me and all of us in the community. And I will pass the floor to you to get to our panelists.
As you started that, I was thinking, oh, who is that? I don't know who she's going to talk. And then it was me. and no matter how many times when I go somewhere and that introduction is read, I feel embarrassed, not embarrassed, but shy every single time I hear that, which Katie, well, it's one of those things that's great to not be boastful, to not, be all those things. And when I hear somebody saying those things, that's kind of how I feel. So I appreciate you saying that. Thank you, Trish. The panel, it's going to be awesome. I sent out an email to the panel earlier saying, hey, we sent you questions, but we're going to try and keep it free flowing. Definitely going to have some of the questions on there, but it might lead us in a different direction. But I am going to start with a more official kind of introduction of each panelist. And I'm going to read something that's been prepared for me to make sure that I don't miss anything for any of our panelists. And then we'll start into some of the questions. And you may notice that my background has changed. As Katie was answering that last question, my phone almost died. So I had to go and plug in some here. So that's where I was. One thing is certain, women leaders understand survival, renewal, and reinvention. They have grit and are not afraid to fight for what they believe in or an opportunity to achieve something of significance. They believe in what they stand for, but that doesn't mean they won't put their ideas and ideals to the test. For them, doing more with less is simply a matter of knowing how to strategically activate those around them. This evening's panel looks at how this has been redefined in today's environment and also the importance of mental health and self-care. When we were doing our survey of topics that women would like to talk about, the theme of redefining and how you do that with mental health is on the topic of everyone's minds lately, especially leadership. And so we wanted to make sure that when we're talking to these ladies that we're incorporating those ideas of mental health and self-care and how that plays in redefinition. Isla Watson, prior to moving to healthcare, Isla had a successful 20-year career in various leadership roles in the Ontario Public Service in Sault Ste. Marie and Toronto. She joined the Sioux Area Hospital in 2009 as the Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer. Her portfolio includes leadership of strategic planning, communications, transformation, enterprise risk, and volunteer resources. Throughout her time at Sioux Area Hospital, she has been a valuable member of a number of initiatives, including the team responsible for the development of the new hospital and the executive lead for strategic planning in building the Sioux Area's Hospital Eye Care Way. Some accomplishments she is most proud of at the Sioux Area Hospital's new vision: the trusted partner, outstanding care, and ensuring Sioux Area Hospital's commitment to involving patient and family advisors in key hospital decisions. Monique Morrison. Monique is the founder of Geronimo Digital Solutions, Success with Digital, and most recently, Moonbeam Healing. She is a huge supporter of training and educating on all things marketing for her community. She has been able to consistently drive revenue growth for her clients. She's a certified trainer and elite coach with digital marketer. She's able to take complex ideas and explain them in easy to understand terms. Monique's mission with Moonbeam Healing is to assist as many people as possible to live a more mindful life and to connect to spirit through crystals, meditation, and other mediums. As the founder of she is the founder of Digital Solutions, Geronimo Digital Solutions, Success with Digital, and Moonbeam Healing, a huge supporter of training and education in all things marketing for her community. She has been able to consistently drive revenue growth for her clients. I think I just read that twice. You know what? That's written there for me a few times. So I'll just add some of my own words. I know Monique very well, and all of this stuff is true. And if you ever had the chance, ask her about the time she was able to go to a conference with Snoop Dogg and how she was on the speakers list with him. Mary Wabano McKay. Mary is the vice president. This is going to test my Ojibwe reading skills. Yaganit Initiatives, Equity, and Student Success at Algoma University, leading the development of institutional policies and processes to advance Indigenous education within the post-secondary sector. She has over 20 years of experience in academic leadership. She works towards reshaping educational landscapes to fit the dynamic and ever-changing needs of today's post-secondary learners. With a strong focus in Indigenous education, her experience spans mental health, justice, Indigenous studies, policy and administration as an advocate, analyst, and director. Mary has developed and provided oversight for culturally appropriate student services, program quality assurance, curriculum development, program design, and community partnerships and research involving Indigenous peoples. Working with Indigenous advisory councils, she continues to lead in Indigenous education, community outreach, student success, equity, and diversity and inclusion. Tiffany Kaiko. Tiffany is a seasoned yoga teacher, registered psychotherapist, professional in art therapy, holds a certificate in thanatology, I hope I said that right, and in brackets it says death and dying, and an advanced certificate in Buddhist psychology with a concentration in compassion. When I read that, I was like, I need to know what those are. I need to know how I can take some of that and put it in my life as well. Tiffany is also an experienced and educated meditation teacher qualified to teach MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction, and is registered with Yoga Alliance as an advanced yoga teacher, ERYT 500. Sorry, Tiffany, I don't know what that means, and I hope I said it right. Tiffany has a private practice called the Soul Compass, where she specializes in holistic healing for grief and loss, trauma, attachment issues, chronic pain, anxiety complexities, and depression. That last sort of bit, I think, to Katie's point, is those things that you carry around, those invisible things that you carry around, but you don't know you're carrying them until it gets pointed out. To me, that kind of expresses all of that in one sentence. I'm on Zoom here on my phone, so the only people that I can see are me and Trish. and I can't figure out how to change it so that when somebody's speaking, their face shows up. So don't mind me if I'm kind of looking weird as I'm doing this. But I'm going to start with the first question, and that's for Isla. The healthcare system has been under tremendous stress over the past 2 years. And I think all of us as people can see that happening around us. And I know if any of you have people in the healthcare field within your family, you know the sacrifice that these individuals have made. How has your leadership changed in this sector, knowing that your people that you lead are going through this? How has your leadership changed?
Thanks, Karen. Well, I'll start by saying some would question the wisdom of taking on a hospital CEO job 18 months into a pandemic. It certainly has been challenging for me. And I'll start with something that I remember my mother saying to me over the years. And I'm in my 50s now. I'm actually the same age as Katie. And like her, I had parents with some experiences with war and with the Depression. And I remember my mother saying, Isla, the thing that made it bearable was that we were all in it together. We were all in the same boat. And that stuck with me over the years, but it's really been with me during these past number of months. And I think it's really a theme in how leadership has changed and how people have behaved. And when I think about the healthcare sector, it's very complex, it's very fragmented. I think we would each have experiences that would say it's very, very tough to navigate. And I think people behave often with a sense of scarcity. It's a scarcity mentality. And organizations sort of circle their own wagons. There are a lot of boundaries, a lot of barriers that sometimes impede things getting done. And one of the things that I've really, really experienced in the last couple of years is that fragmentation is still there, but it's like there's an overlay of cohesiveness. There's an overlay of systemness and people being willing to work in very different ways, to collaborate, to help one another, this real sense of everyone being in it together. People are, I would say, far more willing to share their own personal vulnerabilities in their profession, in their leadership, far more willing to reach out to one another for help and support, and are getting it. And I don't know if people would have seen in the media in the last few weeks, there was this terrible high number of cases of blastomycosis emerging in Constance Lake First Nation, and the Hearst Hospital was really struggling and needing help. And just one example, I got a text from someone at 11 o'clock on a Sunday morning about this issue, and by 11:30, all hospital CEOs, all chiefs of staffs, a number of critical care physicians, were all on a call trying to reach in and pitch in and help one another, and doing so willingly and with real depths of compassion. I would say as well that it's been necessary to be a lot braver and to take some risks and move at a pace that is extremely fast. Sometimes trying things, seeing if they work, needing to adjust. I know Dr. Stone is in the room as well, and I can think back to early days of the pandemic when she and some Emerge colleagues had some ideas about how to create some different flows around the Emerge department. People might remember we also set up a field hospital at GFL, and we got some criticism for some of those things. What are you doing? What are you expecting? Have you done your diligence on this? And there really have been times where we had to take the great advice, rely on what science we had, and just say, okay, this is probably not how we would have done things in other circumstances, but let's do it. And if it's a good risk-based decision that's going to keep people safe, it is something that we would never regret doing. So that's a start, Karen.
That's awesome. there were a few different things in there, I think, that kind of hit, and they lead into the next question. But one of them was, the same sort of theme of we're all in this together. We're all human. We're all going through the same experience. And when you talked about all of those leaders coming together to help that other community, to me, that demonstrates where people talk about how COVID divided us. There are a lot of ways in which it brought us much closer together as well. So it kind of, I think it's done both of those things. And that really, I think, exemplifies that.
For sure.
I'm going to move on to the next question for Tiffany. We've all experienced a loved one passing. So not talking about COVID, just talking about, again, the human experience. We've all had death in our lives in some way, shape, or form. But I think the pandemic has amplified that. And I think it's created a real sense of perspective on what life means when you see how quickly it can go in these kinds of situations or deteriorate, especially with people that you know. So Tiffany, when you think about compassion and somebody's ability to lead with compassion in a time like this, what are some leadership traits that you think a leader should embrace in managing diversity when they're facing these kinds of things, death in a pandemic?
Yeah, thank you, Karen, for the question. And, I love the word compassion. It literally means to suffer with, cum, which is with in Latin, and pati, which is suffer. So it's, I talk about this common humanity, where we're all in this together. And so that's sort of the root of compassion. And but there's another layer to it where you take action to want to help too. So, and Asma mentioned empathy, and that really is also the linchpin for healthy relationships. So, being empathetic and compassionate is, are crucial. Prior to the pandemic, it's well known that 1 out of every 5 Canadians have suffered from or are dealing with mental health issue. I'm surprised it's not more. And as we transverse the landscape of this pandemic, there's no doubt that we've been impacted on a biopsychosocial level. And it's most certain that since 2020, that this number of 1 out of 5 Canadians has increased greatly. There's been some really interesting research that's come out of the UK and since the pandemic, and they were looking at 3 things in particular: uncertainty, ambiguous loss, and anticipatory grief as sort of experiences that are that people are dealing with. And I would like to add to health anxiety, because I see that a lot in my practice with COVID and with the vaccine as well. And this is all creating a lot of anxiety for our individuals in our community. And so leadership traits, I would say compassion. In the midst of these challenging times, leaders are sort of working towards creating resiliency and among their teams, and that should be the goal. Hopefully that is the goal. I mean, that sounds like what Isla was definitely talking about. And I would say that the main traits would be compassion, wisdom, which as talked about, courage, and the ability to foster connection. And so there's a great quote, I really liked it. It's from Fred Kaufman. It's, "Wisdom without compassion is ruthlessness, and compassion without wisdom is folly." And so I would say that practicing, the best way to foster compassion is to practice self-compassion. Self-compassion, has been defined by, some leaders in the field, Chris Nath in particular, There's 3 tenets that define self-compassion. It's common humanity, mindfulness, and self-kindness. And you know that these are all things that have been spoken this evening. And mindfulness, you know, really is such an important thing. It keeps us grounded. It keeps us in the present moment. It really helps us stay focused and deal with the issues at hand in a way that is accountable and responsible. Self-kindness, you know, we can always learn and practice self-kindness. I think it makes us, you know, better, just better. And Katie talked in great detail about that. And you can see how self-kindness and kindness in general has just helped her in her situation. And then of course, common humanity. So understanding that we're not alone and you know, this enables us to have this connection and work towards this, you know, common goal. And I think if we collectively, if we are all practicing self-compassion, we will be more compassionate. And I think that's really important in today's culture. And yeah, so those, I would say those are the most important traits.
Thank you. During your answer, there were a few moments where you cut in and out a little bit, and part of it was during the quote. Before I give any comments, could you just quickly repeat the quote for us?
Wisdom without compassion is ruthlessness, and passion without wisdom is folly.
Thank you.
And it's a quote from Fred Kaufman. Yeah.
Thank you very much. And I was thinking about mindfulness as you were talking about this, and on a personal level, that's something that I've been trying to work on for myself. And I think as leaders, when you're talking about that mindfulness grounding you with the world that we live in right now, things are so overwhelming. And as someone else had mentioned, moving at such a fast pace, it's easy to get caught up in those things. And I think right now, mindfulness is a crucial trait that leaders should learn so that they can, you know, take inventory of what's happening right now and focus on right now and make sure that, you know, they're taking care of their people, of what they're dealing with right now and what may not happen in 6 months or those kinds of things, right?
And I think every organization should have a reflection space. They should be offering their employees meditation throughout the day. They should enlist their staff. They should empower their staff to learn how to teach mindfulness to their coworkers. They should be offering it throughout the day. If anyone is interested in setting up a program like that, I'd be more than willing to help. Please reach out. But I think that's so important. It's so important to really, I think it reduces, number one, it empowers employees, and it gives leaders an opportunity to, you know, to be compassionate as well, and to practice that compassion with their staff.
Awesome. Thank you.
But we're all leaders.
We are.
So it's not.
Yeah, it's true. We are. Mary, I'm going to switch a little bit to around education. And women have always been a predominant part of education in the past, or in history, maybe more around primary education. But I think we've seen a big shift in women moving into post-secondary and other roles of leadership. And so in your experience in the education industry, how would you say those roles have changed and some of the most influential traits of that change?
Well, thank you. First of all, I want to just acknowledge our keynote speaker and the sharing of such an amazing journey and personal journey. What's an amazing person to have come through so much in their personal life and be able to come and speak openly and share in such a forum is just amazing. And I think we've all taken a little bit away from that experience with us and can certainly relate to a lot of it. Back to your question. Yeah, so when I think about women in education, generally, it's not surprising, quite frankly, that women have always been, had a dominant sort of space in education, given that we are all natural teachers of our children. We carry our children, we birth our children, we raise our children. And for many, many years, and I think even still very much this way in the 21st century, women continue to play a primary caregiving role in the lives of children. This spills over, and if you think about, we talk about diversity, and it certainly had been a topic area from the previous conversations, that women still continue to play a very prominent role, a caregiving role, a teaching role. Our first teachers are often our mothers. And so this carries over into very social situations and into the education area as well. We see that the role of women in the education sector certainly has continued to evolve, taking on more leadership positions, both at the primary and higher education levels. It's interesting because these roles and the leadership roles didn't necessarily come naturally. There was quite a strategic effort on the part of women to become more recognized for their leadership qualities, their potential. Making space for women was always a fight, and it continues to be more so for women of color or underrepresented groups. I mean, we heard from Katie and her story, the fight to be recognized for who she is. These continue to be tenets, I think, for women everywhere across the globe. The more we have women in leadership positions taking on mentoring roles, being role models, really trailblazing, I think, in a lot of areas, then we are able to kind of help create a path for younger women who are coming up through the education system. Also pushing back on, a very colonial sort of construct and narrative. When we talk about decolonizing education or creating more safer spaces for all people, this really goes back to women in society, in all cultures across the globe. It really wasn't that long ago that women had to fight for the right to vote, for example. For Indigenous women, the right to vote came a lot later. Being in leadership positions, beginning with education, it really creates pathways to lead in other areas. Another great example might be in the areas of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, where we have to make concerted efforts to create those pathways for women to take on careers in STEM-based industries, as well as taking on leadership positions and more of the non-traditional spaces for women. Unless women are standing and demanding and creating those spaces, I think it would be a longer time waiting for those opportunities to kind of be created for women. So it's truly about women leading women, or women leading to create leadership opportunities for other women and for girls that are coming up. So, I'd be remiss to not mention that although there are, we're creating more and more opportunities, there still are far more barriers and challenges for women and young girls, and in particular for women of color or young girls of color. We need to be very cognizant that, yes, we start to see, incredible numbers of success rates across, many sectors. We also need to be very mindful that we really need to be aware of the barriers and creating culturally safe teaching and learning spaces for both our students as well as the staff and faculty that are there providing these educational opportunities and journeys for our young people.
Thank you so much for that. I think there's a lot of different elements in there that even people in different sectors can identify with. And you were talking about the blazing trails and making the new paths. And I think that's a great segue into the question for Monique. So Monique is usually dealing with a lot of new entrepreneurs or people wanting to change their business. And as we know, women are, among the leaders of the most new businesses that are being started in this country. And some of the things that each of the ladies tonight that we've already heard talk about, they're redefining what that means to be an entrepreneur and how they meld that experience with their personal lives. So Monique, in the digital space, in the new digital transformation of women in business, as leaders, as spouses, mothers, aunties, grandmas, leaders of the household, and as professionals, what are some of the impacts that you've seen on women in that sort of digital space of transformation and that entrepreneurship?
Sure. Yeah. So it's been interesting because COVID has now been with us for so long, and you could see as the Zoom meetings started when COVID first hit, you would see the women primarily feeling shameful when the kids would pop in the background, but it wasn't something to be shameful about, right? And there was this whole thing about we were still minding the children. And so as I've talked to so many women entrepreneurs and the struggles that they're going through as entrepreneurs, and especially when we're more home-based and not working from the offices, there's this ongoing struggle, especially if they have children that they have at home. I'm finding this overwhelming stress that they're starting to feel because they're trying to balance everything. And you have these children that are, trying to take your attention. And so what I've seen for the most part is this kind of push and pull where you're wanting to still push forward in your career, you're wanting to push forward in your business and be able to invest the time that's needed to be able to have that growth. But in the same instance, you're also feeling responsibility towards the children that also need the care, and to be mindful of satisfying their needs for attention and nurturing, especially when they're meeting with their teachers maybe online, and now they're back in school, but they're still needing that extra support because the world has changed for them too. And so it's been interesting over the last 18 months or so, watching that there's a point where you just say, you know what, enough is enough. And I'm finding that entrepreneurs, women-led businesses especially, they're kind of scaling back. They're scaling back on the things that they're finding no longer serves them. And I've gone through this transformation myself, having a marketing agency. We celebrated 10 years in business, but over the course of COVID, I had to tell myself, why am I working so many hours doing something? Yes, I find it, I get, fulfillment from it, but is it truly my passion? And what I'm loving in the people that I'm meeting is that these women entrepreneurs are really starting to transition towards what they're truly passionate about, what brings them joy, and what type of businesses and entrepreneurship paths are going to provide that feeling of personal satisfaction. Because if you only have so much time during the day and you only want to spend so much time on the computer and invest that time, what is going to make you feel happy and fulfilled, and also be able to provide the support to the people around you that are needing it. So in that same breath, also, when it comes to digital transformations, it's just really streamlining that process, right? Building digital infrastructure that allows you to save time, work smarter, not harder, being able to really have those online processes in place that allows you to capture as much time as you can for the things that you're passionate about.
That's a really sort of dynamic answer that touched on so many different things. And again, like everyone else, I think there's a lot of different things in there that we can identify with. And a little quick anecdote around the kids in the background. So in my culture, when I grew up, we will go to gatherings, or you will go somewhere where somebody was speaking, or you will go to some official meeting or anything like that, we always brought our kids. And everybody would have their kids there, and they'd be running around and screaming, or they'd be sitting, or they'd be asking questions. And it was very common to see that. And it was actually welcomed, because all of a sudden a young child would ask a question that no adult wanted to ask, or they'd make a comment, and it was just natural. So I'm glad that you mentioned that whole thing on the WebEx, and it, bringing some of that, as Mary had mentioned, colonializing things where it's not acceptable to have family in different areas of your life. It's not so fragmented. Everything can be in one spot. It's a little bit before 8, and we had on our schedule that things were to be done at 8. And just like every year when we do this, we run out of time because there's so much to say and there's so much to share. So I'm wondering if everyone is okay, if we do one more round of questions with all the ladies. We give everyone another chance to answer a question if people are willing to stick around. And so I can only see me and Monique. So if somebody could speak up and let me know that it's all good, that we can keep going. Rory, Trish?
So far I'm seeing in the chat that so far
I think you're all good. Nobody's leaving.
Yeah, we're good.
Awesome. Okay, so we'll do another round of questions for all the ladies. So we'll go back up to Isla.
We'll keep going till there's 12 people left.
Okay, let me know when we hit that mark.
We need our beauty sleep.
Okay, so there were a few different questions left here, but I think in thinking about some of the other things that the other ladies have talked about, probably I think the one that kind of has the most relevance, or that I would want to bring up, is around the shortage of human resources. And especially in your sector, when we talk about burnout and we talk about exhaustion, I know in the financial world, it's about meeting after meeting after meeting and WebEx, and because you are so available all of the time now. Mm-hmm. And bring us more information around in your sector and the human resources, those challenges that you've had, and how women have been affected by that shortage.
Sure, Karen. So I think there are many dimensions to this issue, and I've been in healthcare about 12 years, but I know even before that, I knew that there probably for decades we've been talking about concerns about shortages in the profession, particularly in nursing. We know we have a lot of people in Algoma who don't have a primary care provider. The newer physicians take fewer patients typically than what happened in the past. So we've had a storm brewing for a while about concern about human resources capacity. Added to that, when we get to adding things like a pandemic, and I would say even before that, the challenges of the sustainability of the health sector, and worries about, is it appropriately resourced? Are these jobs even doable? That you hear and read a lot about people leaving the profession and really reflecting about a role like perhaps a registered nurse and saying, is this worth it? And can I do this? Or might I need to retire or transition to something else on an earlier basis? In terms of leadership roles, also, very complex, very challenging. Like you say, Karen, people are feeling like they need to be on all the time. It's really important that we focus on trying to address this. And what I was saying in my first questions response was, some hope I see as the pandemic has accelerated the pace of change, accelerated some things about systemness. I'm hopeful that that's really going to help us get to a place where we can do things far more effectively, using the talent that we do have to greater effect and benefit. I think that, some of the terrible tragedies that have happened, like crises of COVID outbreaks in long-term care, has drawn, extra attention to some investments that are needed, to some rethinking of how we look after some of our most vulnerable. And I'm really hopeful that some of that will continue to get some really good attention. We do have a provincial election coming up, which may actually add to that. I think in the last couple of years, during the pandemic in particular, one of the biggest challenges for women in the profession is that as challenging as it already is, people have had to in their working lives confront things like looking after patients who haven't been able to have visitors, being away for long hours because of sometimes shortages or increased levels of absence due to illness, being at work a lot more and not with your family and loved ones as much as you might want to be. Having people place all sorts of demands on you physically and emotionally while you're at work, and then having to do even more of that when you go home. And, you know, I know there are many stories of you know, tough situations where people without visitors, it fell to the staff to really do some extra things, to spend time with people, to sit with them. You know, I often, based on where my office is in the hospital, have a chance to kind of get to know some of the patients and their patterns, and made it a real point to spend some extra time with them. When I talk about the system coming together more effectively, I'm really hopeful that we're going to start to address some subtle and not so subtle differences across the sector. So if you're a personal support worker, and you know, I've had elderly parents, I know how vital their role is, both in home and community care, in long-term care, in hospital settings. How do we make those roles more palatable? How do we make them roles that people will stay in longer? How do we harmonize and improve things like compensation and working conditions? And, you know, I think these things are getting a lot of attention. Really focusing on patients and saying, what would the patients benefit from? And getting our minds toward maybe new models. Maybe they don't need a nurse in all circumstances. Maybe there are other roles that could be brought in to provide some different sorts of supports. So for sure, that's going to be an ongoing challenge. But, you know, again, I think that, you know, some of the pandemic silver linings are going to help us figure out our way through some of these things in a better and faster manner than we might have otherwise.
Thank you. Thank you for that. That is actually a really good segue into the question for Tiffany. And as I had mentioned when I was reading her bio, there were the different kinds of therapy and things that she does that are, I think, for most of us, at least for myself, I know a different way of doing things, or something that I don't know when I would be interested in doing. So one of the things that caught my eye was art therapy. And I know that one of my children went through something like that as well. But when you think about some of the things and the demands that Isla was talking about, I'm sure those stresses can, any leader in any sector can talk about those kinds of stresses for the people that work in their organization. So what would you said you'd love to set up a program for anyone you offered to do that. So what would be some of the changes in how people deal with things or express themselves during this time, and skills that they can take into the future to improve mental health and well-being?
Yeah, so I'm an art therapist and a play therapist as well. So kids love that, and it's a really effective therapy for kids as well. I'd have to say that you know, using expressive arts and creative expression is a really beautiful way to offer a holistic approach to healing, or to you know, investigating or reshaping your narrative. It's just a really beautiful way for people to express themselves, when words sometimes are just not enough. You know, in this world, you know, it seems like we're all sort of dealing with an identity crisis. And so as we sort of begin to explore our brokenness, so to speak, using arts and play and expressive ways to tell our story can be very healing for a lot of people. Really, it comes from so much deeper than just the mind. It comes from the body. It comes from our heart. It comes from our gut, and it can be very healing in so many ways. It's a different way to tell the story. And it's very, yeah, it's really beautiful to see what comes up for people when they express themselves creatively.
When you say that, what comes to mind is part of Katie's story when she was talking about how I didn't have the words. I didn't have the words to describe what I was going through. And I think everyone can identify with that. At some point, you're like, you know what you're feeling, but you don't know how to express it in words. And to your point, it may take someone out of their comfort zone, but it's a different way for them to be able to express that.
Right. And it's, it's
so
the way.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're cutting out a little bit, Tiffany. Can you repeat that last part? It's a different way,
the way our brains process trauma. We don't process trauma with a beginning, middle, and end. We sort of process trauma in a different part of the brain that's memories in our body, and deep within ourselves. And, that's a whole other conversation, but that's why the art is a beautiful way, or expressive arts is a beautiful way to tap into this, this unconscious brilliance that's deep within each one of us, and wisdom.
Thank you. I love that last sentence. Unconscious brilliance. That's great. Mary, so of the questions that we have left, I'm interested to hear about, you had talked about in your other question about blazing that trail. I talked about that before, but young Indigenous women. And so being Ojibwe myself and experiencing a lot of what you talked about, and in trying to do some of that for my own daughters, and knowing in our own teachings and our culture, the role that women play in leadership. From your perspective and experience, talk to us about how that's changed for young Indigenous women, that leadership, those spaces that are opening up or not, the challenges that are there. So, and how they're viewed from greater society now that there's such a spotlight on our people. Can you talk to that, please?
Sure. Well, let me start with this. I am Omashkego Anishinaabe. I am from the James Bay, from a small town called Moose City. My parents are still there, still living, both retired. And with this COVID, I've not had the opportunity to visit with them for 2 years. And so it's been very, very tough. So I just wanted to kind of think about Anishinaabe women or Indigenous women. We've always been leaders in our families. We've always been leaders in our extended families. And it really wasn't until the influx and the imposition, really, of religion in our communities, forced religion, and of course, assimilationist policies, including the Indian Act, that really then positioned Indigenous women in a very precarious situation, both within the legal system of Canada, the legislation of the Indian Act, displacing women from their families as a result of intermarriage, for example, losing all rights and status as an Indigenous woman to their traditional lands and territories, as well as their families when there was an intermarriage. So we're coming out of a very dark period as Indigenous women who were, continued to be subjugated and oppressed and marginalized in our home communities, in our home territories, on our lands, and ultimately across Turtle Island. And so when I think about, the transformation that we've had to endure over the last, several hundred years, really, we've come quite a remarkable way and still have yet a long way to go. When we think about some of the leadership opportunities in our communities, oftentimes under the Indian Act, again, we are forced to go through this patriarchal system that really upholds more of the masculinity and these notions of what leadership ought to look like. We're bound by titles such as chiefs in our communities, when perhaps that was not necessarily our governance structure from a traditional format, from a traditional system of governance. I think about my grandparents and a little bit about my grandparents. They both lived very late in life. And my grandmother, when the apology for residential schools was given by then Prime Minister Harper, my grandmother was the oldest living residential school survivor on the floor that day when the apology was given. She was 104 at that time, and she lived another 7 years following the apology. So she lived to be 111 years old. She was this tiny, tiny little lady. I'm not very tall, but she stood probably to my shoulder towards the end of her life. And I always knew her to be this tower of strength. My grandfather was well over 6 feet tall, very strong, strapping man. Yet she ran the household. That was pure leadership, and it didn't come at any sort of, with any sort of lateral violence or anything like that, but it was the way women carried themselves, Indigenous women. And even to this day, you talk about being very outspoken, that's a trait and actually a value and principle of Indigenous women. Becomes very prominent in many of our communities where women will take a leadership role. And in fact, to take that back to our traditional teachings, that in fact, it's our grandmothers who will keep us on the straight and narrow and tell us when we are maybe on the wrong side of an issue or where we need to be moving towards, reminding us of our responsibility, our collective responsibility. So when I think about young Indigenous women, it's about returning to those teachings. It's about connecting back to our identities as Indigenous people. It's about connecting us to our responsibility as Indigenous people through those teachings, through ceremony, so that when they're in classrooms or in spaces where they are a minority, that it is the strong connection to identity, language, culture, placement of where they are on their traditional territories, or being a guest, such as me here being a guest in Boating on Anishinaabe territory, always situating myself within this context of knowing who I am, when to speak and how to speak. And so all those things are imperative. I also want to make mention, it's important to not forget that we're still dealing with a very serious issue of murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. It's important to add the girls on here, because when we think about murdered and missing Indigenous women, we're thinking about adult people, right? But at the same time, we're talking about children as young as 11 years old being taken, abducted, and never knowing, whatever happened to them. We have a lot of grieving families. We have a lot of grieving communities. At the same time, we endure the targeted violence. We endure systemic and structural racism and take up leadership positions. I think about, the many women I've come across throughout my journey, throughout Turtle Island and beyond, speaking up and out about all of these systemic issues while still carrying themselves with such poise and confidence. And, that's the burden, I think, that we share as women of color, that we can stand in front of a screen or a podium, smile and speak, yet still deal with a lot of violence that we carry either intergenerationally or on a day-to-day. And then we come back to our homes and care for our children, our grandchildren, our extended families, and play that role as the pillar oftentimes in our families. And be equetch to our partners, to help carry that load at times, recognizing too that there still are very many women and men who are the sole caregivers of children. So thinking about all of that in this greater context of leadership, whether it's women or boys, particularly for those children of color, that we have to do better. We have to recognize that although we're all in this pandemic together, we're all dealing with very, very different circumstances, and many people coming from not so many places of privilege that are still dealing with struggling to meet basic needs. So let's be mindful. And I think let's be very strategic or thoughtful in our response and being able to provide the extended support. When we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, there's this nice little graphic that I like to kind of think about. And it's about these three little individuals that are trying to peer over a fence to see the ball game. And when we think about equality, we think, well, they all have equal access, when in fact, one's shorter, one's taller, and the other is kind of in between. So those boxes, what are those boxes that we need to have in place to ensure that there is equal access and inclusion for all people? So I'll stop there, and I could probably go on, but I think I've kind of answered your question.
You most definitely have. And I think anyone who has children in the room will identify and think, okay, you know what, those are ways that I can talk to my daughters and young girls about things that they need to be mindful of as they're growing up and building their skills as leaders and as women. And so in thinking about that and moving to Miigwech, Mary, for that was awesome. When we to Monique, it's a great segue, and something that Mary said that's sticking with me is, and I remember my grandmother teaching me this as well, when to speak and how to speak. And so for Monique, when we think about women starting business, and then we think about the way the world is and how connected we are electronically, and women starting these businesses, how does that provide women the opportunity to speak up for themselves more in their own voice, the way they should, when they should speak and how they should speak? So can you talk to us about how women are using that digital space to amplify their voice?
Yeah, so I think one of the greatest things about living in a digital world is the connectivity that we have, and that you're able to go online and essentially find your people. And whether it no longer is within your, geographical location, you can find the people. If you're, going through suffering, you can find people that understand you. If you're trying to make change in the world, you can find the people that are on that same mission. And when it comes to being online, we now have all of these different mediums that we can put out our voice to and be able to find those people. And so I think in terms of how women are using their voices is really the way that we're all connecting online. The medium is the same, but the more that we see these pioneers coming through and speaking their truth, more and more women are feeling comfortable to be vulnerable and to speak their truth. And I think collectively, we're just banding together and becoming stronger. And just like our grandmothers taught us, when to speak and how to speak, I think there's a big shift even within how women connect with each other and how we are trying to have more compassion with ourselves and with the people around us, and understanding that we're not in competition, but that we can lift each other up. And since COVID started, I've been a coach with WOZN, which is this group in Southern Ontario. It's women and non-binary entrepreneurs that run social enterprises. And it's been such an amazing experience because every day I see these new entrepreneurs coming forward, and they're full of passion for what they believe in, and whether or not their business in itself is a social enterprise, they're starting these companies with purpose. whether that's the company, what it does, or by being able to provide a product or service that then gives them the funds to be able to provide to create change. And so I think for myself, and predominantly social enterprises are run by women. And so I think that for me, it has been the most exciting change that I've seen when it comes to digital transformation, because when you start to use your voice, because you can reach the whole world, you're able to see that so many people resonate with those messages, and it just gives you strength. You know, it's like anything, the more you talk about it, the more you speak about it, the more you are able to be your authentic self. It gives you strength to continue on that path. And then it just trickles down, I think, to your peers, to younger generations. And so that, I think, has been very exciting when it comes to digital transformations that I've seen.
Very powerful answer. And what it kind of brought to mind at the end of that, when you were talking about it, was when you're the change from your voice only being heard in a limited space, and now it's worldwide. When you think about the fact that if you are passionate about something and you start talking, that it's not just right here that's hearing you, there's literally women on the other side of the world that can listen to that and identify with it. And that's, you know, a great reason why we would record this, because there's so many great things being said tonight, so many great things being shared. I'm so glad we're recording, because somebody's going to Google and your name's going to come up, or Mary's name, or any of our other speakers is going to come up, and ladies and anyone are going to be able to log in and listen. So I just want to say thank you to all of the panelists. Thank you so much for your time and your very authentic answers for some hard questions, you know, things that need to be spoken about. And I also want to thank everyone for taking the extra time, but I'm going to turn the close over to Trish. So again, Tamigwech to everyone, and I'll turn the close over to Trish.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you again to all of our panelists. That was, you know, great, insightful answers, and we appreciate that. We have some door prizes now to go through, but firstly, before we get to that, Tiffany has written a book. Can you tell us, and she's graciously donated two of her books that we are going to raffle off in just a moment. But Tiffany, could you share a little bit about your book and that journey, please?
Yes, I'd love to. So the Art of Healing is it's a fun, creative workbook that I mess it up and use lots of color and just have fun with it, and sort of an excavation of self, journey to self-discovery. And so it's fun. The wellness method is a 6-week wellness plan. It's basically what I do, and I put it on paper, and it's 6 weeks, and it incorporates just different ways to incorporate healthy habits into your life, and it includes mindfulness and some movement, and that sort of thing. So
awesome, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for letting me offer that to this group this evening.
No problem. And Dawn, if you could give me in our chat the first winner of Tiffany's book, please.
Okay, so The Art of Healing, Creative Workbook to Reveal Yourself.
I feel like we need some Jeopardy music.
Yeah. Is going to Laura Boston from Ontario Health.
Awesome. And Dawn, we will arrange to get the prizes to the winners. Awesome.
We will. Absolutely.
And the second
and
book?
The Wellness Method, 6 weeks to holistic wellness with life-changing habits that improve your well-being, is going to Pam McKinnon at RBC.
Oh, And Pam, one of our lovely lady leaders, has just moved to a new role in Regina. So she's just left Sault Ste. Marie, but Karen and I will make sure that she gets that book. We do have two other larger door prizes now. The first one is a RBC gift bag with a lovely RBC goodies and a $100 gift card from Pino's grocery store. And that winner is
That is going to Rebecca from Algoma University.
awesome. And lastly, our last gift is sponsored by the BDC, as well as Laser Advantage Medi Spa. It is 2 hydrofacials, as well as complimentary home skincare package, a value of $600.
That is Erica Hogan.
Hey, Erica, awesome. Well, thank you again to Isla, Monique, Mary, and Tiffany. That was an amazing evening. And as well again to Katie, thank you again so much for your time and insight. And Karen, for all of you do for us and for moderating, thank you very much. I can't thank you all enough, and I hope you all enjoyed this event and looking forward to next year's, hopefully in person. And I wish you all a very happy holiday and thank you very, very much. And that concludes our evening.
Thank you, Trish, for leading us through. Thank you, everyone.